from GC 90.7's Studio A on the campus of Gulf Coast State College, Rapline with Emily Blaze.
He is a Florida native and award-winning author of several books, including Double Exposure, Thunder Beach, and the John Jordan Mystery Series, just to name a few. Author Michael Lister is here today to talk about his latest in that John Jordan Mystery Series. It's called Rivers to Blood. I'm Emily Blaze. This is Rapline, and joining me again is Michael Lister.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming by. And one of my favorite characters, John Jordan, and this is your 6th John Jordan Mystery Series.
Yes, it is. 6 in 17 years.
In 17 years. So what is it about John that makes you keep coming back to that character?
You know, John is the first character I ever created, ever wrote. The first novel I ever wrote, Power in the Blood, featured John Jordan. And it was the first thing I ever got published. Of all the characters I write, I would say John is more of my alter ego than most, even though a bit of me is in all of them. But I love John and love his life and his friends and his struggles and what he's dealing with. When I wanted to create a detective fiction series, I looked around and looked at what had influenced me, what spoke to me, and I think you can see that in the books. I was highly influenced by writers like Hemingway, like Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett, but then also Robert B. Parker and James Lee Burke. And I think you can see all of those in there, although I feel like that John in this series is unique, and the fact that he is a prison chaplain. It would be so easy, and I've been tempted to get him out of the prison system, make him leave. And I'm not saying at some point he might not, but the tension between someone who really does want to solve crime and live essentially what is in many ways a hard-boiled life as a detective, and yet is a minister and chaplain and a counselor and is continually wanting to help people and minister mercy, and the tension between those two, I think John embodies in his own life and his own experiences, but then in his two very disparate vocations, I think it all comes together. So I love John and foresee going back to this series until I die.
Wow, that's great. So we can look forward to more John Jordan in the future, hopefully.
Yes.
So, Michael, tell us about this latest called Rivers to Blood, your newest book.
It is the 6th in the series, as you mentioned. And in this one, more than any other, John has a couple of, actually 3 different cases going on. This is, before each novel has a main case, and then there might be subplots, or there may be little tributaries that run off of that. But in this one, he really is investigating 3 different things, 3 different crimes, 3 different things going on. One is the escape of an inmate that he actually witnessed out in the rural, he's on the rural road headed home, and he sees and notices a transport van. And I noticed when since I was a prison chaplain for a number of years, and as a chaplain and being part of the DOC, I notice inmates now when they're out working, when they're on transport. You see the van, you see the bars and things, but then you see that yellow DC tag. And so I always notice when those, and so John notices that, and then he sees it swerve off the road a little while later. And so anyway, so there's an escape that he's investigating. There is a series of assaults within the prison that he's investigating. And then outside of the prison, there's actually a lynching that takes place near the river. And so all 3 of those things he's investigating, and they may or may not come together in different ways before the book is over.
And now, as you mentioned, John Jordan is a former prison chaplain, and you yourself
John is still a prison chaplain. I'm a former prison chaplain.
See,
Yes.
you're one and the same so many times. But John is the prison chaplain, and you were.
Yes.
At
Essentially, the decade of the 90s, I
Right.
was a prison chaplain with the state of Florida.
So tell me about the real-life duties that you handled in the prison.
Mostly, you do crisis counseling. You are the person who notifies inmates when there's any kind of emergency in their family, their outside lives, and then help them deal with it. You run the religious programs, which includes every religion. As Americans, if we are incarcerated, if we're convicted even of a felony, one of the rights we don't lose is that of religious freedom. So the chaplain is supposed to, when he does his job, she does her job, work with all the different religions to make sure that each segment of the population is represented with religious services. You work with the staff and counsel them and help them and encourage them, and that's a part of the job I really enjoyed as well. You do support groups. I ran AA and NA and SLAA groups for the offenders, life skills groups, a lot of counseling, some teaching, and then really organizing all the religious services that go on in the institution.
And now, as I'm reading the John Jordan books, I get the feeling that John, even though he is a chaplain, really doesn't embrace organized religion so much as spirituality.
I agree with that. Yes, I would say John is religious, but yeah, not in an organized sense. And that's another tension in his life that I love, because he's a religious leader who's not necessarily a religious person, especially in any organized way. And so he constantly feels like he doesn't fit in, and he actually doesn't fit in. He doesn't fit in organized religion. He doesn't particularly fit in with chaplaincy, and yet he's good at it. He really does make a difference. He's not good at it in the sense that his superiors would say, he's not a yes man, and he's not someone that they're going to give commendations to, but he is continually helping people. But in his desire to help and in his counsel and in his ministry, he has no quick, easy answers, no magic fixes. He really abhors the shallow side of religion. And so that's a tension for him that he's constantly striving with. In the books, which are primarily murder mysteries, we see far more of John as the investigator than the chaplain. He's doing chaplain duties all the time. He's ministering, he's helping, he's counseling, and we only see a little bit of that because the plot, the main story, is actually the mystery, or in this case, the three mysteries going on. So when they overlap, we see bits and pieces of his chaplaincy, but if we were seeing the totality of his life, we'd see a lot more of him being a chaplain and doing those kind of activities as opposed to investigating.
And as you're talking about John's struggle with, say, his boss and organized religion, John is also dealing with the new warden, which it's going to be his way or the highway.
Yeah, a new warden has been brought over from Angola, the toughest prison in Louisiana, the Farm, notorious prison in Louisiana. And what is happening is the public outcry for being tough on crime and criminals is, so this is a political move. And this warden is brought over. The death row has been relocated to the institution, Pottersville, where John works, PCI. And so now it's not only the largest prison in the state, but it is taken on a very different tone and culture, and death row is here. So there's a lot happening that John's having to deal with in the midst of everything else he's dealing with.
And of course, one of those things that John is dealing with is his ongoing relationship with Anna.
Someone who he has pined for, had a thing for since high school. They have, crossed each other's paths and come into each other's lives again since he became a chaplain. And she has not been available At various times, he has not been available. And so there's another tension, another opportunity for drama in the books. But when I first started the series 17 years ago, I knew I was not going to keep it that way forever. I didn't want the reader to say, you know what, will I ever know if John and Anna are going to get together? And finally, in this sixth book, Rivers to Blood, you do find out whether or not they either, decide to try to have a relationship or say, you know what, Uncle, we're done.
And this is Rapline here on GC 90.7 FM and GCTV. Our guest today is author Michael Lister, and we're talking about his latest in his John Jordan Mystery Series. It's called Rivers to Blood. Now, describe the setting for Rivers to Blood.
Well, as the title indicates, a lot of it takes place in the Apalachicola River Basin and on the river. There is, I mentioned the inmate who escaped. He escaped close to the river. I mentioned the lynching that took place. It takes place on the river. And so this river swamp and the river itself is, I guess, next to the prison, the primary location of this novel. John spends a lot of time on the river, and probably as much on the river in this novel as in the prison and in the small town of Pottersville where he lives. So it is the cypress swamps where you have these deadhead cypress knees and stumps in the river itself, lining the banks. You have this very thick, dense oak, pine, cypress swamp that is this beautiful and brutal environment.
And let's talk a little bit about, I know our setting inspires you and our area, but what is it that really inspires you when you sit down to write? This area that I call home, that I write about, inspires me probably more than anything else, and I think that comes through in the books. With this one being set on the Apalachicola River and in that area, it is sacred to me. It is important to me. It is something that I value, and not as someone, I'm not someone who's always on the river. I don't even, to this point, I hope that it changes eventually, but I don't even own a boat. I'm not someone who's out there every weekend on the river doing things, but I go to it often, and I am inspired by it and moved by it and nurtured by it. It is spiritual for me to go down to what is known as the end of the road, where the road past the Dead Lakes, the dam over the Dead Lakes, where it dead ends into the Apalachicola River. That's sacred for me. And just going down there and sitting on the dock and putting my feet in the water and just taking in what's there is just, it's inspiring. And so that comes out in the novels. Usually when I'm writing, creating a novel, certain things maybe I've heard in the news or friends and acquaintances I'll pick up things, and there's something that'll hit me that I want to explore. I want to just see what's there, what I find interesting, and I feel like if I'm interested in it, then I can write a book that will be interesting about it, and that's usually what inspires me and how I get started. And of course, the river, the area that you're writing about and speaking about, is beautiful. It can be inspiring, but in your book, Rivers to Blood, it can also be very scary and very dangerous. You don't know what's around the next turn. Tell me a little bit about the sadistic killer in the book.
Well, first of all, you mentioned the environment, and what you just described, beautiful and yet can kill you, beautiful and yet brutal, that's life itself. And so this river and this ecosystem and this swamp is a metaphor for life itself. And we can love nature and worship in nature, be inspired by nature, and if we don't also take into account that it can kill us, we can become over sentimental about it, and it's shallow and it's empty. Or we can look at the world and see just a brutish, brutal, hateful place. And then I think we miss the beauty and the real spirituality that's there. So I think the balance of those two things, again, that's another tension, like the tension in John's life and career and things. And as far as the killer, the antagonist of every novel, I have a protagonist and an antagonist, main ones, and there may be others too, but each one has a different characteristic, has a different modus operandi, and so sometimes there are killers that are in my novels that I think most anyone would feel sorry for and could relate to and say, you know what, the way this happened, the way this went down, I could see myself in that situation. And then other times, there are killers who really touch on what I think is true evil, that are sadistic, that are so mentally ill and spiritually bankrupt, corrupt. It's like they have programming that's wrong, wiring that is wrong, and has always been the case. And so he's a sociopath. And they're manipulative, and they can be charming, but the entire world is seen from their own perspective, the selfish, self-centered point of view that is, they have no feeling for anyone else. It is just about what brings them pleasure, what they want to do, with no regard for anyone else.
And so what can you tell me about, or what do you want to share with us about the reference to the artist Salvador Dali?
I love Dali, always have. And you talked about things that inspire me, and Dali inspires me. And I didn't even realize, the books that I write are, they have been written over any number of years, and sometimes they'll come out close together, even though they were conceived and written many years ago. And I didn't realize till recently that in both my main series, the big series that involves Jimmy Riley, set in Panama City in the 1940s, and in Rivers to Blood, the Dali and that whole movement is in both books. So in The Big Beyond and The Big Hello, we see the influence of Dali and surrealist and surrealism, and we see it in Rivers to Blood. And when John, when he hears about one of the crimes that he's investigating, what instantly comes to his mind is this image that he has seen in a Dali painting. And so he immediately goes to the prison library to find that image and to see, is there a connection between this image and this crime that's been committed, because it links immediately in his mind.
You are listening to and watching Rapline here on GCTV and GC 90.7 FM. My guest today is author Michael Lister, and his latest book is called Rivers to Blood. It's the 6th book in the John Jordan mystery series. John has a friendship that many in his rural community might think a little different. He's best friends with Meryl. Tell me about Meryl.
Meryl Monroe is this lifelong friend of John's, who has been a part of his. There's something about the people you grow up with that understand things. You have a shorthand with them, you have a connection, you have shared experiences that you can't have with anyone else. That's why I think certain people feel connected to the people they went to high school with for their entire lives when they rarely see them, or maybe just at reunions, but they did time together, so they can relate. And that's what John and Meryl have. They have a friendship that is second to no relationship in their lives. They're a certain type of men. They're men that are cut from the cloth that I think Emerson was cut from. They are self-reliant men. They are men that can trust themselves. They have a certain code they live by. They're gonna do the right thing. And because they're those kind of men and they have each other, they can trust each other, can count on each other like no one else in their lives. Their experiences are similar but different. Meryl is African American in this small southern town. His experiences are different from John's, and yet there's a lot of similarities because of how close they've been, because of how much they relate to one another, how much they empathize with each other, and then, of course, after all these years, how much they've shared. I absolutely love the relationship between John and Meryl, and I think it's unique and rare, and I think it seems increasingly difficult for people to have friends, to really close friends. Experts say you can only have 6 really close, intimate relationships at one time, that's all you could even sustain. I think most people don't have nearly that many, especially if you count spouses or family. But then, it's rare to have a friend, and I think it's especially rare for men and a certain type of men to have friends. And so that they found each other that from the very beginning, that they have each other, I think is an extraordinary thing. And I think it comes out in the novels, and I think when I think of what I term as the John Jordan novels, I really see them as they are the John Jordan, Anna Rodden, and Marilyn Monroe novels. It's those 3 characters that are the heart of this series, and nobody more so than Meryl and John and their relationship.
Now, as you mentioned at the top of the show, John Jordan is kind of the black sheep of his family, and he does things his own way. And in Rivers to Blood, he's got a lot of things going on within his family. Of course, his father, who is sheriff, is running for re-election. His brother, law enforcement person, they're at odds with each other. And Mom is sick.
Yeah, his mom has been sick the entire series, and because, it's interesting, the series has taken place, the books have been published over 17 years, but the space in the books don't cover nearly that much time. So for the course of these 6 books, really 5 novels and 1 collection of short stories, his mom has been sick and he's been dealing with that. Obviously, that's not going to go on much longer. Either she's going to get help and be better, or more likely she's going to pass away. His dad, who is the sheriff of this small county, is finally, for the first time in a long time, facing opposition in a primary election. And so he's having to think politically. He's having to weigh and John can't stand that. John, as going back to the Emerson-type man who is a nonconformist and is going to do his best to be authentic and real and do what's right in every situation, and never consider the political implications, never consider how it might look or what someone might think. His dad's having to do that constantly, and so there's a real, tension there between them in that, having to deal with that. And for him to see that in his dad, it diminishes his dad in a way. He can't help but think less of him, partly because John is so not a political animal that to see decisions made in that light really, it challenges their relationship. And then, of course, his brother, who Jake is more typical to the area in which they live, more one of the good old boys, and it really fits comfortably in there where John does not. And so they're almost always at odds, even more so in this novel because of the case, because of what they're working, because the ways in which their agendas are conflicting. So there's a lot going on in Rivers to Blood, and I really like the series and how it unfolds. Blood Sacrifice, last year's book, took John away from the prison. He was at a retreat center. He was investigating someone who died during an exorcism. And then this one, I just feel like they're all so different, and that there's so much in them. And as we're talking about it, I realize just how much is in Rivers to Blood. And very, very happy with this book.
And of course, John Jordan was your first book. Is
yes,
that right?
Power in the Blood.
Power in the Blood.
That featured John was the very first book. It was published in '97.
And so So how long have you been a writer?
I'm celebrating my 20th year now. John Jordan was conceived, and he was born in the summer of 1994. That's when I became a serious writer, and that's when John was born. And so I wrote Power in the Blood over 94, 95, sold it in 96, and it was published in 97. So 20 years total, 17 years of the books coming out.
And what was your first paid writing gig?
It is Power in the Blood. That was the first thing I ever wrote, first thing I ever submitted, and so that was the first royalty check I ever received 17 years ago.
And where can people get Rivers to Blood?
My website, if anybody wants a signed copy, they can order the hardback or the paperback from my website, or you can get it online, Amazon.com. But you not only can you order the hardback and paperback from Amazon, but you can get the Kindle book immediately. You can start reading it right now, download, and you don't have to have a Kindle. You can download the Kindle app on your iPad or computer, and you can start reading immediately. And ebooks, you get them instantly. They're also less expensive. And so anyway, online, my website, which is just michaellister.com, and then amazon.com.
And before we go, what is next for John Jordan?
You know, I am just now thinking about what's next. I think I know what's going to happen. I've not started writing anything except up here. And I know the first line of the next book, which...
Do you care to share?
I will tell you. It is, I Was Happy. Now, have you ever heard John start a novel like that? The next novel starts with I Was Happy, and then I'm not saying he's going to stay happy in the course of the novel, but that is the first line of the next book. And I do have some ideas about what's going to happen and where it's going, but I hope to start writing it. I'm doing some editing now of books that are coming out this year, later in the year, and then I will start the next Blood book.
Well, thanks so much for coming by and telling us about Rivers to Blood.
Thank you so much.
And that is a wrap for this edition of Rapline. Thanks again to my guest author, Michael Lister. Rapline is a service of Gulf Coast State College and GC 90.7. And remember, if you're thinking about a pet, consider the adoption option. I'm Emily Blaze. Thanks for listening and watching, and have a great day.